Namaskar. Well, friends, I heartily welcome you all to Bhim, Bhashya, my audio-visual podcast series on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. This audio-visual podcast series has 54 short speeches of about 20 minutes each on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, unraveling as many as 25 different dimensions of his multifaceted genius. Friends, this podcast series is focused on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, his thoughts, his actions, his philosophy, and above all, the grand vision that he had seen for our country. That is what this podcast series is all about. So let's proceed. Well, friends, in this 53rd episode, I'm going to talk to you about Dr. Ambedkar's historic role as a modern day champion of Buddhism in our country, or Buddha Dharma Chakra Pravartak, one who tried to turn the wheel of Dharma in 360 degrees by going back to the religion of Buddha that had prevailed throughout our country for nearly 1200 years. That is why he is called Buddha Dhamma Chakra Pravartak, one who turned the wheel. On October 14th, 1956, Dr. Ambedkar formally embraced Buddhism and converted around 7 lakh of his followers from Hinduism to Buddhism. This momentous decision was a culmination of a long process spread over nearly 5 decades. Dr. Ambedkar's interest in Buddhism dates back to his school days when a teacher named Krishnaji Arjun Keluskar gave him in the year 1908 a copy of the biography of Lord Buddha titled Life of Buddha, written by him, which had a profound influence on the young mind of Bhim. The first time Dr. Ambedkar made a reference to conversion to another religion was in 1927 during the Mahad Saudar Lake Satyagraha. At that time he had said, and I quote him, "We want equal rights in society. We will achieve them as far as possible while remaining within the Hindu fold, or if necessary, by kicking away the worthless Hindu identity." Unquote. Initially, Dr. Ambedkar made an all-out effort to bring about reforms in the Hindu society. He wanted to remove the untouchability while remaining within the Hindu religion. His Mahad Satyagraha of 1927, Nashik's Kalaram Satyagraha, Temple Satyagraha of 1930, they are clear examples of his sustained efforts to reform the Hindu society from within. Finally, however, Dr. Ambedkar realized, and quite painfully I must say, that it is impossible to change the attitude of caste Hindus, and therefore he decided to abandon the Hindu religion. The turning point came in 1935 when Dr. Ambedkar made the shocking announcement, and I quote him, "I was born a Hindu untouchable, but I will not die a Hindu." Unquote. In 1936, Dr. Ambedkar laid out the option to convert as a choice between the following 3 religions: Islam, Christianity, and Sikhism, each of which had apparently different advantages. One of the 3 choices, Dr. Ambedkar felt that conversion to Islam or Christianity would denationalize the depressed classes and therefore diffuse the freedom struggle, whereas embracing Sikhism would not only not harm the destiny of the country, but will actually help the destiny of the country, unquote. In fact, in May 1936, Dr. Ambedkar deputed his son Yashwant and his nephew, and sometime later 13 more followers, to the Golden Temple in Amritsar to study Sikhism. Within a short time, however, Dr. Ambedkar dropped the idea mainly because he saw no hope of emancipation when Sikh untouchables told him of the atrocities that they had suffered at the hands of the Jats. Dr. Ambedkar's early consideration to abandon Hinduism thus proved short-lived, and he turned his attention to the political struggle. While addressing a public gathering of untouchables in Mumbai, the date was August 28, 1937, Dr. Ambedkar appealed to his followers to give up observing all the religious festivals under the Hindu religion. He assured them that conversion is sure to take place, but the matter needs thorough examination. Dr. Ambedkar, he said, and I quote, "The new religion to be adopted must be adopted only after a close searching examination," unquote. In the meantime, through painstaking research on history of Indian society, Dr. Ambedkar arrived at the conclusion that Buddhism had prevailed in India for more than 1200 years, during which time the entire Indian society was cohesive, united, and free from any discrimination based on the accident of birth and the caste. In a path-breaking address to Madras Rational Society, Madras, that was on September 24, 1944, Dr. Ambedkar argued, and I quote him, "Indian history is nothing but struggle between Buddhism and Brahmanism. There was in ancient India a great struggle between Buddhism and Brahmanism. The Buddhists were revolutionaries, while the Brahmins were counter-revolutionaries." In the course of the same address, Dr. Ambedkar pointed out, and I quote him, "Buddha was the first person to preach the message of liberty, equality, and fraternity in the history of the world," unquote. Throughout this period, however, his affinity to Buddhism seems to have been growing in his mind. In 1934, when he built a house in Mumbai, he named it Rajagruha, after the capital of ancient Buddhist kings. In the mid-1940s, when Dr. Ambedkar established a number of educational institutions, they were all named Siddharth or Milind, both in the Buddhist tradition. In fact, even while in the Constituent Assembly, he was actively involved in adopting many Buddhist symbols for the Indian Republic. For example, the chakra, which is the wheel of dharma, on the Indian national flag, the lions of Ashoka, the Buddhist emperor of ancient India, as the national emblem, and also the inscription of a Buddhist maxim on the pediment of the Rashtrapati Bhavan. Dr. Ambedkar also lobbied for Buddha Jayanti, the birth anniversary of Lord Buddha, to feature in India's calendar of official holidays. Dr. Ambedkar had already begun to write articles in Janata, that was his fortnightly, elaborating on the meaning and significance of Buddhism. In 1948, Dr. Ambedkar republished Lakshmi Narsu's famous book, The Essence of Buddhism, which had offered a modernist interpretation of Buddhism, denying karma as rebirth. In 1950, Dr. Ambedkar published an article titled Buddha and the future of his religion in the Journal of Mahabodhi Society. In the article, he argued that Buddhism was a religion for the whole world. In 1950, Dr. Ambedkar began advocating rationality in the choice of religion. In Kandy, Sri Lanka, on May 26, 1950, Dr. Ambedkar began advocating the eightfold path of Buddhism, so-called Ashtanga Marga. In the same conference at Colombo, June 6, 1950, Dr. Ambedkar argued that Buddhism paved the way for democracy and socialistic pattern of society. He pointed out, and I quote him, unlike Brahmanism, equality is the main feature of Buddhism. The religion of Buddha gives freedom of thought, freedom of self-development to all. The rise of Buddhism in India was as significant as the French Revolution, unquote. While addressing a public gathering at a Buddha Vihar in Mumbai, the date was September 29, 1950, Dr. Ambedkar said, and I quote him, as long as there is no purity of mind, wrongdoing, and utter disregard of morals would continue in everyday life, and as long as man does not know how to behave with another man and creates barrier between a man and a man, India can never be prosperous. To end all these troubles, India must embrace Buddhism. Buddhism is the only religion based on the ethical principles and teaches how to work for the good and well-being of the common man, unquote. Dr. Ambedkar then declared that he would devote the rest of his life to the revival and spread of Buddhism in India. In July 1951, he formed Bharatiya Bauddha Janasangha, which became Bharatiya Bauddha Mahasabha in May 1955. During an All India radio broadcast on October 3, 1954, Dr. Ambedkar said, and I quote him again, positively, my social philosophy may be said to be enshrined in three words: liberty, equality, and fraternity. Let no one, however, say that I borrowed my philosophy from the French Revolution. I have not. My philosophy has roots in religion and not in political science. I have derived them from the teachings of my master, the Buddha. My philosophy has a mission, and I have to do the work of conversion to Buddhism, unquote. In 1956, Dr. Ambedkar addressed the World Buddhist Conference at Kathmandu on Marxism versus Buddhism. This talk was based on an unpublished essay entitled Buddha or Karl Marx. In it, Dr. Ambedkar outlined the propositions of Marxism, including class conflict, exploitation, and nationalization or abolition of private property as a solution to all human ills or dukkha. He noted that many of the propositions had been demolished by logic and experience. According to Dr. Ambedkar, and I quote him again, we welcome the French Revolution because it aimed at producing equality. But it cannot be too much emphasized that in producing equality, society cannot afford to sacrifice fraternity or liberty. It seems that the three can coexist if one follows the way of the Buddha, unquote. In 1955, Dr. Ambedkar started writing a book, Buddha and his Dhamma, intended as a simple, eloquent, and rationalistic Buddhist gospel, which was published, however, in 1957 a year after his Mahaparinirvana. On May 24th, 1956, barely 7 months before his Mahaparinirvana, Dr. Ambedkar announced that he would convert to Buddhism in October of the same year and declared that the conversion ceremony would take place on October 14th, the day of the Hindu festival of Dashera in Nagpur. The head of the Buddhist monks of India, the Burmese bhikkhu Mahastavir Chandramani, was invited to carry out the ceremony. The final ceremony was a magnificent one, and it demonstrated not only Dr. Ambedkar's hold over his followers, but also a massive emotional commitment to entering into a new faith. People poured into the grounds from villages and towns all over Maharashtra, dressed in their finest white clothes. As the scheduled week of the ceremony approached, 500,000 men, women, and children who had formerly been considered untouchables virtually took over the city. And it was a crowd of about 7 lakh people. Dr. Ambedkar took Diksha. Dr. Ambedkar and his wife, Dr. Savita, were the first ones to take Diksha, which they did in presence of the huge crowd. The bhikkhu gave them the Trisaran, that is the oath of allegiance to Buddha, to Dhamma, that is to say, Buddha's doctrine of righteousness, and to Sangha, that is the community of monks. The bhikkhu then asked them to avow their allegiance to Panchashil, that is to say, the 5 principles which include the refusal to kill, to steal, to lie, to have illegitimate sexual relations, and to drink. After citing the Trisarana and the Panchashil, both Dr. Ambedkar and his wife bowed 3 times before the statue of Buddha, and the Diksha ceremony was completed. Dr. Ambedkar then pronounced, and I quote him, "By discarding my ancient religion, which stood for inequality and oppression, today I am reborn. I have no faith in the philosophy of incarnation, and it is wrong and mischievous to say that Buddha was an incarnation of Vishnu. I will strictly follow the 8-fold path of Buddha. Buddhism is a true religion, and I will lead a life guided by the 3 principles of knowledge, the right path, and compassion." Unquote. Dr. Ambedkar then turned around and, in an unprecedented move, himself administered the vows to the 7 lakh of his followers assembled there. Dhamma Chakra Pravartan had begun. Well, friends, let's understand the historic importance of the conversion to Buddhism. First of all, it was unprecedented in the world history. The world history is replete with cases of mass conversion, but that has been only under duress, under the pressure of sword or pressure of gun, or with monetary incentives. This was the only conversion in the history of the world where 7 lakh people adopted a new religion simply on the words of their leader, that was Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. 2. Why did Dr. Ambedkar choose Buddhism? Dr. Ambedkar chose Buddhism because of the principles on which it is based, that is liberty, equality, fraternity, and social justice. He wanted a religion. Dr. Ambedkar wanted a religion that originated in the Indian soil. That is why Islam was ruled out, Christianity was ruled out. Just imagine what could have happened had Dr. Ambedkar led all the former untouchables to Islam. Imagine what could have happened had Dr. Ambedkar led all the former untouchables to Islam. What would have happened to the Hindu-Muslim communal balance? What would have happened to the rift? And one can not imagine the consequences of that action. Dr. Ambedkar was conscious of that. Then the question is asked, what did the former untouchables gain by conversion? Well, they gained identity, asmita, as equal human beings. There are many anecdotal evidences to show the kind of change of mindset that has taken place after 1956. Before 1956, look at the names of the children among the former untouchables. In Maharashtra, it used to be Dagdu, Dhondu, Kachru, Kachra, dirt. That was the name of a child. In that movie, one of the Hindi movies also, one of the lame fellows, I think that movie was Lagan. There is this untouchable, his name is Kachru, Kachra. Before 1956, all this happened. But after 1956, show me one Dagdu or Dhondu or Kachru that is born. No. Now Siddharth is born. Now Milind is born. Now Gautam is born. No longer Dagdu, Dhondu or Kachru is born. That is the change of mindset that has taken place because of the act of conversion led by our supreme leader, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. That is the silent revolution that conversion to Buddhism has brought about. Well, friends, we can conclude our session here. So long until we meet again. Thank you and namaskar.